In my endeavor to clean out my storage unit a little bit, I had the bright idea to trade multiple bikes for one project four-wheeler. Logic being that it is much easier to sell one four-wheeler than three parts bikes. So, three parts bikes later, here it is. This is a 1999 Yamaha Timberwolf 250. The first and most important milestone is I need to get it to run so that I can get it onto my trailer. We just kind of pushed it in here since I didn't have my trailer at the time. This now unfortunately means that however I get it loaded, it's going to be by myself. It doesn't need to run well. In fact, it barely needs to run at all, but I do need it to move under its own power for at least a few seconds. So let's start there. The issues I know of are as follows. It has no battery, the starter solenoid needs to be jumped, the petcock supposedly leaks, it has no gas in it, it idles very high when it does start, it has no air filter, the airbox isn't attached, the pull start is also not attached, and just in general it looks like ass. Also, while recording the original intro, I happened to notice that the exhaust just wasn't attached to the motor whatsoever, and there were probably two broken exhaust studs, so I'll add that to the list. Now I know that seems like a lot of issues, but rest assured we are just getting started.
They said it idled really high, and I can attest to that. When they started it up, it idled really high. Here's why. We're going to set aside the fact that it's running open carb and probably running pretty lean, but if you notice, there's supposed to be a choke in there, and there's not. Now, luckily, probably the only person on planet Earth to say this, but thank goodness I have a bunch of Chinese carburetors. Oh? Okay. Well, it works for the time being as far as knowing if it'll run or not.
Also, some minor foreshadowing. This was not the last peculiar thing with the carb, but that won't be an issue for another few minutes in the video, so for now let's go and replace the petcock.
Seems like it works just fine to me.
Well, that was odd. Anyways, let's replace the starter solenoid and the battery.
We're going to use this one because the other one that I purchased does not fit. Why not? Or why would it?
Fifth. Well, the battery at least works, but there is a growing trend here, and I know at least one of the four people watching this already knows what's going on, but that person was not me. I was clueless, so I just went to install the airbox anyways.
Yeah, that's way too big. That boot is way too big for that carburetor.
Okay, something is definitely up. The carburetor that was on it was very clearly a Chinese clone, but the airbox wasn't even close to fitting it. There's a lot of things I have no faith in. The government, the Weather Channel, and gas station deviled eggs. But I have an unyielding faith in the ability of the Chinese to copy stuff. As sure as the sun will rise, there is a 12-year-old in China making an exact copy of a 90s Japanese four-wheeler carb. This is not to say that they work amazingly all of the time, but they at least fit. I googled a carburetor for a 1999 Yamaha Timberwolf 250 and it looked identical, so I logged this as a bit odd but decided to just deal with it later. In possibly the dumbest, most complicated way possible, but we'll get to that. For now, I just needed it to start, and despite a long list of issues, only a handful of those were actually keeping it from starting, and I had just fixed those. Kinda. Fuel was getting into the bowl, but it was also getting on the motor and the floor and the drive shaft, so we'll just consider that one a half fix. Also, no, I can't believe I didn't notice what was wrong with it either. If you didn't catch it, don't worry, I'll talk about it in a minute. So, with a Harbor Freight screwdriver as my new starter switch, it was time to fire it up. It did start and run. Unfortunately, I did not get it to go in reverse, so I decided one out of two directions is good enough, and pushed it ass first outside. While you watch the futile effort of me trying to start and then reverse this thing, now would be a good time to mention why I'm trying to get onto the trailer. I do have some tools here at the storage place, but most of my tools are at my house, as well as extra parts like fuel line, spark plugs, oil, gas, and much more. Taking it home was going to be necessary to really work on it in depth. Hey, look at that. In the time it took me to explain all that, I ran out of motivation and decided to just brute force it in the direction I wanted to go. You'd be amazed what a feels like temperature of 105 at 80% humidity will do to the human spirit. And with that Herculean effort, I could finally start some real troubleshooting, if we want to call it that. Now, to address the elephant in the room, this is not a 1999 Yamaha Timberwolf 250. That's what I was told it was when I got it, and I had no real reason to doubt that at the time. This is, in fact, according to the VIN, a 1999 Yamaha Big Bear 250. However, at this point in recording, I still had no idea, which makes this next bit astronomically dumb in hindsight. My next big challenge was getting the carb to fit an airbox boot, and instead of taking the time to really find the problem, I spent 10 times the effort developing a solution. See, I had just traded an old Gixxer 750 for a 3D printer and I was super excited to use it, and I decided I would make an adapter that went from the carburetor to the intake boot. I will preface this by saying that I had the printer for a few days at this point and had at most 4 hours of experience with FreeCAD, so the bullshit that you're about to bear witness to is going to reflect that. The first draft was okay. I had a crack in this part somehow, so I decided to just fill it with gasket maker. Fun fact, remember how I alluded to the carburetor earlier? Well, if you didn't notice, the fuel line is actually going straight into the vent port and not the fuel inlet port, hence the stream of fuel coming out of the carb. Luckily, this wouldn't matter for reasons I didn't yet understand. But anyways, back to the boot. The diameters were spot on and the fit was really snug, but it was way too long and the airbox didn't mount right because of it. So I designed version 2, which was shorter, had a less aggressive angle, and most importantly, didn't look like fucking Bumblebee's nutsack. Instead, it was very short, stubby, and black, like Optimus Prime's did. Unfortunately, this version was actually too short. Again, the diameters were right, and it was a very good fit in that regard, but the angle was now not sharp enough. Version 3 was a sharper angle, longer, and more refined. This too was unfortunately not up to the standard I was wanting. To take a break, I decided to try and install the air filter, which, guess what, didn't fit at all. This pissed me off so much that I felt like I needed a break, so I did the easiest and least infuriating task ever, which is rewinding the recoil starter. This is when I ran into yet another issue. I reassembled the recoil starter, having only ever done it once before, and somehow I did it correctly enough, but it still wasn't engaging the motor when pulled. When looking up a used one for sale to see if I was missing parts, I realized the recoil starters I was looking at weren't even close. This, combined with the 50 fucking other things that were odd, prompted me to wire 2 whole neurons in my brain and have a theory. Based on this theory, I ran the VIN. What I found out was what you've known for the past 5 minutes. None of the parts fit because I had ordered them for a vehicle I didn't have. The battery, the starter solenoid, the air filter, the carb looking way off, it all made sense in an instant. And to be clear, the people who traded this to me were super nice, and I, for the most part, believe that they thought it was a Timberwolf, hence the wrong carb on it when I got it. When I looked up a new carb for the right four-wheeler, it was totally different, so I ordered it. This unfortunately means that my hours of blankly staring at FreeCAD and FreeCAD tutorials were a bit of a waste. As an added kick in the nuts, I also noticed a small oil leak coming from the cam sprocket cover, which is just an O-ring but still mildly annoying. I decided before going too far into this to address the exhaust. I didn't look too closely when it was in the storage unit, but I feared that both studs were broken off inside the head. Luckily, for the first time on this four-wheeler, the outcome was actually better than expected. The lower hole had nothing in it at all, and the upper was clogged with mud. After cleaning it out, I found 2 bolts that worked and the exhaust snugged up perfectly. I also decided to revisit the pull start. I felt as if I had put it together right, but I knew something somewhere must be missing. I found a very helpful video on this topic, which I will link in the description. This video made me realize that the piece I was missing was the friction spring. Unfortunately for me, the large container of springs we had did not have the spring I needed. After some trial and error, I found a piece of rubber hose that worked, until it didn't. Regardless, I decided to go for a test ride. After playing with the mixture screw, I was able to ride it with the caveat that it did not like low RPMs much at all. While I was riding it, I noticed the smell of oil and determined that the totally small and minor inconvenient oil leak was a tad bit more than that. I decided to get it back in the garage and determine exactly where the leak was coming from. Little did I know, I was about to give my 82nd consecutive kick in the dick and balls. If you couldn't tell over the video, I saw oil wetness start from the head bolt, which is odd. Even more odd was that it moved when I touched it. Hoping it was just not tight, I attempted to tighten it only to be hit with the dreaded righty-loosey.
Oh. Oh no. Ah. Fuck.
Honestly expected the head bolt to be broken, but when I removed it, I was surprised to see that not only was it fully intact, but the threads were fine. This did leave the only possibility being that the threads on the block were stripped, meaning no matter what, I would now have to take the motor apart to see how bad the issue was, let alone to fix it. Typically, this would be the point where I call it, not because I lack the desire to fix things, but because right now this was a running, riding, and stopping four-wheeler even with this issue, and it would be far easier to sell it like this and just say it has this problem than it would be if I took it apart and couldn't fix it. I was going to do this, but I decided it would be a good learning experience, and I would probably feel bad if I was selling it and didn't know the full extent of what was wrong. So, in true 70-year-old garage fashion, I took a running, riding machine and in about a half hour made it not that. I got everything apart and noticed a few oddities, like the cam chain wearing a groove in the head. The base gasket was also just some gasket maker, not an actual gasket material, and the piston looked good. Very good. In fact, it looked almost new. Everything on this four-wheeler came together and told a story of someone who was doing a new piston job and did a half-assed job, pawning it off on someone who didn't know better, who then pawned it off on me, who absolutely should have known better. Anyways, if you ever wondered what the inside of a 1999 Yamaha Big Bear 250 looks like, here you go. The threads were damaged, but there was still enough metal left where I felt comfortable tapping it instead of drilling and then time-sorting the hole. So I tapped the hole, and then threaded the head bolt on to make sure, and chased the other holes too just to be thorough. Now, with the magic of video editing, the 2 days I spent waiting on my next day delivery have been condensed into a few seconds, and we can now start reassembly. This was not a difficult process. First the base gasket, then the jug, which did take a little manipulation to get the piston in, but you really shouldn't expect anything less. The new head gasket went on, followed by the head, and also you'll notice there are now 2 cam chain guides instead of just one. This is actually how it's supposed to be, but whoever worked on it previously just forgot it, I guess. The process of making sure it was in time was a bit tedious, mainly because whichever engineer at Yamaha designed this thing assumed that my fat chud forehead and this frame tube could occupy the same space at the same time, and as much as I tried, I was unable to do so. I did manage to line it up though. Just for good measure, I made sure to accidentally line the cam sprocket up wrong, so I got to do it again for practice. With the motor in time, I decided to tighten everything down and turn the motor by hand to make sure it didn't make any expensive sounding noises. I was very nervous about tightening the head bolts, but they all tightened down good. I turned the motor by hand and heard no abnormal noises. I don't do motor work too often, but when I do, I like to remember the steps I did and double check things. In this case, I had a feeling about the 2 bolts on the cam chain side of the head, and I was right. They were loose. Oh, and I had the heart attack of a century here because I dropped a bolt in the cam chain passage.
Oh my fucking god.
I thought for sure that it went all the way down, but luckily it got caught between the 2 sides of the cam chain and I was able to fish it out with little issue. Since I had the header pipe off, I decided to remove the rust and coat with some high heat paint. I also decided that having the four-wheeler as one solid color would be nice, so I decided to take the body panels off and paint them. This was really just a touch-up job. The previous owner had painted over the OEM red, and it can be difficult to rattle can plastic. I've done it before with success, but it requires good prep, and even with good prep, plastic will still bend and flex, which will chip most paints anyway, so just keep that in mind when watching me do this. Someone had also done a camo job on the rear rack, so this thing was like 5 different colors. And not only was it bothering me, but making it look more uniform would help to sell it too. Unfortunately, while the base coat went on amazing, the same could not be said for the clear coat. Much like myself, the clear coat did not react well to the near 100% humidity outside, and essentially turned white. I did decide to wait a few days to see if this would magically fix itself, but unfortunately that trick didn't work this time. So I took a scuff pad to everything and painted it a second time, this time with just the base coat. Unfortunately, avoiding the humidity wasn't an option unless I wanted to kill myself in the garage, and while the thought had certainly crossed my mind a few times during this project, I was pretty determined at this point. I also decided to take the time and paint the racks at this point. Now on to less important things, like making it start. Wanting to avoid electrical for as long as I could, I decided to tackle the recoil starter. Again. Unfortunately, I just could not track down the OEM spring anywhere, so I went and bought a whole spring variety pack. One of them actually fit and almost worked, but just not quite. I did try for a very long time to find a solution to this, but without the correct spring, it was never going to work. Also, I know at least one person is screaming at me to just buy an aftermarket one, and I need to point something out. I am not one of these big creators that will make so much off of this video that it offsets any cost I have in this thing. I have to sell this thing and try to at least break even to cover my costs in it. And spending $150 on a new recoil starter assembly that may not even work right doesn't make sense for me. With that, I decided to move on to the electric start. Believe it or not, I actually went through the trouble of using a multimeter here. The battery tested at 12.9 volts, which is normal. I got 12.9 volts in a couple other places I tested, but all my testing led to the left-hand control switch. I disassembled the switch and cleaned it, although there was no visible issues. This, unfortunately, did not fix the issue, so I ordered a new, used switch. And finally, that also didn't do shit. Somewhere in the main harness there was an issue. No, moron, you didn't check the fuse was good, I replaced it anyways 3 times. The solenoid was good, but I replaced it anyways. The relay was good, but I replaced it anyways. New battery, new key switch, new old control switch. I also tested it mix matching all of these parts to make sure it wasn't just a bad part being replaced with a bad part. Somewhere there was a break in the harness. And referring back to our little reality check earlier, I did not really have the time or money to buy and install a new one, so I opted to take the easy route, and I really hate that this ended up being the easy route, of just making a starter circuit from scratch. I joke about it, but it really wasn't that bad. I ran 2 12-gauge wires from the starter solenoid leads up to a push button that was rated for 50 amps. I did hold the starter down for a bit without the kill switch on just to verify that the wires didn't get too hot, and they don't. This is not ideal, but it is far better than arc welding a screwdriver to the solenoid every time you want to start it. Now it's time to go on a test ride. Well, I was thoroughly hoping that the running issue was because it didn't have an exhaust gasket, or because it didn't have an air filter, or a combination of the two. However, it still dies when giving it gas from a stop. Remember, this is a Chinese carb, so I decided to check the jets. The jet that it came with is not going to focus, but it's a 105. It's supposed to have a 95, but I did find a 97.5, which is way closer, so we're going to use that. And as far as the pilot jet, it is supposed to have a 42.5. And this is the original pilot jet, and it had no marking whatsoever, so I have no idea what was actually in it, but I was able to find a 42.5 pilot jet. After replacing the jets with the correct, or almost correct sizes, it ran great.
I think some of that struggle was because I was in a very low gear. Or sorry, a very high gear.
So, present day, here we are at the four-wheeler. Overall, extremely fun project. The brakes work great. It does start, run, and ride. It is in way better shape than I got it in, which is kind of the whole point. If you've made it this far, a like and a subscription would be insanely helpful. I recently passed 1,000 subs as of the time of posting this, or as of the time of recording this, and I'm very appreciative of that. Thank you very much. In fact, this is the day after I hit 1,000 at the time of recording this bit. So, thank you guys so very, very much. I appreciate each and every one of you, and we will see what we can get into in the future.